Okay, we are now in week 13 of Estates and Trusts. We've gone through the general classifications of trusts. Now we're going to get into a little bit more specialized trusts, and then what trusts are used for. So we went through the fact that there were express and implied, active, passive, public, private, and public is also charitable. We went through testamentary and inter vivos. Now let's go through, and then we went through all the implied trusts too. So let's go through what these miscellaneous kind of trusts that are really kind of specialized are for. The first one, and I'm starting on page 452, is a spendthrift trust. A spendthrift trust is used where you're creating a trust for the benefit of someone who isn't really good with money. That's what a spendthrift is. Typically, you will see these kinds of trusts set up by parents who are worried about their kids. Maybe their child has an addiction issue. Maybe they just like to spend money. They have some kind of mental disability. So what a parent will do is set up a spendthrift trust for them. Now, spendthrift trusts are specifically for kids or people who you're worried that they're not going to have a roof over their head. You're worried that they're not going to be able to have food or transportation or pay for the basics of life. And so a spendthrift trust instrument says to the trustee, hey, pay the basics. Make sure that their mortgage or the rent is paid. Make sure that they have some form of transportation. Make sure that they have a stipend for food. Make sure that their utilities are paid. Typically, a spendthrift trust will have direction for the trustee to pay the bill directly. So, for instance, if I set up a spendthrift trust for one of my children, I would direct that the trustee make sure that the electric is paid, the gas is paid, utilities are paid by paying the bill directly. You don't hand money to the beneficiary directly. The money goes, on a gift card for groceries. The money goes directly to the electric company because, especially when you have a child who has an addiction issue, the money probably won't go where it's supposed to go. Okay? So that's what a spendthrift trust is. It's very specific. Usually it's testamentary, but it can be inter vivos also. If it's inter vivos, generally the settler will be the settler and trustee until the point of death, and then another trustee will be appointed. Okay? So that's how that works. Okay, and the next kind of miscellaneous trust we have out there is called a Totten trust, and I'm on page 453 of your text. A Totten trust is a bank account, a joint bank account. It's a payable on death kind of trust. So if I have a joint bank account with Mr. Hetson, we both own 100%, right? And when I die, he still owns 100%. And so it's payable on death to him. That's really what a Totten trust is. Okay? The next kind of trust that we have is called a sprinkling trust. A sprinkling trust is where we're giving a ton of discretion to a trustee, where the trust instrument says, hey, when we have when I put in this trust document, I have 3 beneficiaries. But if beneficiary number 1 needs a little extra this month, give them a little extra. Excuse me. If beneficiary 2 needs more next month, give more to them. Use your discretion. Give them what they need. Really dangerous. really dangerous because remember, one reason a beneficiary can challenge a trustee is you're playing favorites. So you're kind of giving them a reason. Now, if it's expressly in the document that it's a sprinkling trust, it sort of protects them, but again, not the best way to do a trust. Okay? For the purposes of trusts, what do we use them for? Well, one is for funding college education. Actually, there are trusts that are set up by every state under what's called Section 529 of the IRS code, so that you can put money in trust for the benefit of your child going to college. 529 funds. And they're non-taxable, and what happens is you can put money, as say a parent or a grandparent, into a 529 trust to reduce your income tax. So it's non-taxable to the beneficiary, and it's non-taxable to the settlor. So that's a really good way to fund college educations. Another example is financial management for people who are inexperienced in handling money. So if I want to create a testamentary trust for my children and put a lump sum of money in there, and I don't want them to have that money until, say, they're 40 years old when they are better at handling money, I'm going to put it into a testamentary trust, and I'm going to have some kind of a bank or financial institution be the trustee, manage the money until such time as I think that that adult child will be able to take over the reins. Another really good reason for using a trust is to avoid probate. And we've talked about this already, where you can create an inter vivos trust so you don't own anything. You've put everything you own into a trust and you've become the beneficiary. And then when you die, you put in the trust document, when I die, the new beneficiaries are XYZ. And when they die, the new beneficiaries are XYZ. You can go that far into the future to avoid probate. Look, taxes stink. I don't care how many politicians stand up and tell you it's your patriotic duty to pay your taxes. No, it's not. The government doesn't produce anything. It confiscates and creates penalties for people who make money. And you've already paid your taxes, right? I've paid taxes my entire life. You mean to tell me I got to pay more taxes when I die? Forget it. It's going into a trust. Okay? So avoiding probate is a great reason for putting together a trust. It's probably the original reason why we ended up with trusts. Remember, trusts are a legal fiction. They're created by the government. They're created by your legislature. They don't exist normally in nature. So, that's why. What else are they used for? They're used for public and charitable reasons, like to promote education or health, science, religious institutions. Most churches, synagogues exist because people have made endowments to the institution. What's an endowment? They've left trust money to them. They've made a trust where that particular religious institution, that church, that synagogue, is the beneficiary of a trust. That's called an endowment. Okay? So, if you are very strong in your faith and you've been involved in your church, in your synagogue, in your last will and testament, you may wish to create an endowment, aka a trust, where that particular church or synagogue is the beneficiary of the trust. Okay? Now, what are the legal restrictions? Well, can't do anything illegal with them. Well, that was easy. Or immoral. or make people do things. You know, there's all these old movies out there where, well, I have to get married before I'm 21 or I'll lose my inheritance in the trust. You can't make people do that. You can't make people get married or divorced or have children as an incentive for getting money or becoming a beneficiary of a trust. Can't do it. Don't care how many movies you see about that. Not real. Okay? Fake news. There are some statutes out there that will tell you specifically what you can and can't do. And your book goes through some of them. Okay? You can't do it based on someone doing something illegal. Right? If you rob a bank, you can be the beneficiary of my trust. You can't create a club like that. It just doesn't work. Okay? What if I have an informal or an incomplete creation of a trust? Maybe it's handwritten and it's got some precatory words that say I hope, I request, I beseech, I recommend, okay? Rather than having a mandate. Well, courts are kind of split on that. Or if a trust document doesn't sufficiently identify a beneficiary, or if an instrument fails to name a trustee or name a successor when the trustee goes away, the document names the trustee and describes the beneficiary but doesn't specify the duties of the trustee. Although the trust instrument purports to be transferring legal title, the terms aren't specified and they've only been implied. Okay, what do you do with all of those? If the intent is not clear, the court's kind of split. So you can't put into your trust document, I hope, I wish. It doesn't work that way. My trustee shall do certain things. Not, I hope they'll do that. Okay? Hope and a prayer. It's not really a trust document. For a lot of jurisdictions, that will not qualify. Okay? If you don't name a beneficiary, the court will sort of create a legal fiction of resulting trust. If you don't name a trustee or a successor trustee, the trust itself won't fail, and typically the court will create the trust out of whatever instrument is there. Let's talk about living trusts. Living trusts, again, the IRS hates these. And you can either do a declaration of a trust or a trust agreement. There's a sample declaration of trust on page 462. Okay, if you wish to do one, you have to have a declaration in there. There has to be specific intent given when you do an inter vivos trust. Otherwise, the IRS is going to come in and say, this is one big sham. You really still own your stuff. Okay? Now, you can have a revocable or irrevocable living trust. Revocable means it can revert back. Irrevocable means that's it. If it's revocable, the IRS pretty much comes in and says, this isn't really a trust. Irrevocable is what you want. Your book gives examples with revocable trusts. And a lot of people use a revocable trust in lieu of a last will and testament. And again, you're avoiding taxes, which means the IRS and the government hates it. So you've got to be really, really specific when you put together a revocable living trust. Okay? Lots of times what will happen is in your last will and testament, you'll say everything that I own pours over into this trust. Was a living trust and now is converted to a testamentary trust. Okay, that's called a pour over will. It's very simple. It's literally one paragraph that says everything I own goes into my trust. Okay? An irrevocable trust, you can't amend it, you can't revoke it, you can't cancel it. These are the ones that the IRS likes, because you're showing with intent, I'm really never getting this stuff back. It's really not mine. Okay? A revocable living trust, again, is used to avoid probate. And your book goes through, there's a a revocable living trust here and an irrevocable one. The preference is the irrevocable one. In fact, I would never advise people to do a revocable one. It's, unless you're doing a living trust that is, say, a spendthrift trust for one of your children until they reach an age or get over an addiction or whatever. So it's revocable. So maybe when they are better, you can revoke the trust and they can live their lives for a temporary condition. But if you are doing estate planning, the irrevocable one is the one that you want. Okay? There's a sample pour-over will on page 478 of your book, and basically it just says everything that I own goes into my trust. Okay? What do we do for pre-death and post-death administration? You have to make sure that you preserve the trust property. Right? You don't want to give somebody a house and then it gets demolished when you die. You have to make sure that you maintain whatever it is that is the corpus or the body of the trust instrument. Okay? And you have to make sure that your trust files its annual income taxes. It's its own entity. Remember? It's a suitcase. The suitcase has to file taxes. It owns itself. And so it must file taxes. Now, the trustee has to make sure that taxes are filed on behalf of the trust every year. And that'll be part of the trust instrument, directing the trustee to make sure the taxes are paid every year for the trust. Okay? Post-death administration. Remember we talked about the fact when you as an individual die, the first thing that the executor or administrator has to do is get an EIN for you. The suitcase needs an EIN when you die. Okay? So an EIN has to be filed for, and a notice concerning fiduciary needs to be filed. Okay? A checking account needs to be filed. These are all things that are that an executor does, right? There is a parallel here. Transfer funds from the old checking account to the new checking account for the trust. Notify beneficiaries of the settler's death. Collect, preserve, and appraise the trust property, especially if the trust property is supposed to be sold and then the money dispersed. Prepare a schedule of property held outside of the trust. You have to do an inventory. Determine the investment and disbursement of trust property. Again, for those trusts where if I'm the settler and I die, I direct in my trust instrument that the trustee is supposed to give certain things to certain people, you better make sure that that happens. Pay creditors' claims. Make income and principal payments according to the trust instrument. Establish and fund any additional trusts provided for in the original trust. I can say in my trust, when I die, create 2 separate trusts now, one for my daughter and one for my son. And the trustee has to do that. Okay? Obtain professional management and investment services. That's a must. Get an accountant, get a lawyer. You must. Fill out the trust annual income tax forms. Prepare a Schedule K1 form for each beneficiary who receives money from the trust. A K1 form is an IRS form that the beneficiaries of the trust have to tell the government, hey, I got this much money. There are taxes on some of those amounts of money that the beneficiary receives. Apportion and disperse the beneficiary's shares as provided in the trust agreement, and then file the final trust income tax return, that is, if the trust is coming to a close. Request discharge as trustee, again, once the trust is closed. Now, this could be a trust that continues, but for those trusts that are going to close, those are the steps that you take. Okay? I hope that that gives you a rough idea of what trusts are for. I think everybody should have a trust. I think that it is not right that you pay the government 3-4 times taxes for what you've earned in your life, and a trust is a good way to avoid paying some of those taxes anyway. Okay? If you have any questions, as always, get back to me, do your discussions, do your assignments. Thanks.